as an activist for the LGBTQI2S plus community who's passionate about providing accessible and culturally appropriate mental health services through a social justice lens. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist who has had the opportunity to work with a variety of folks and cultures, but her passion always brought her to give back to her own community. And then we have with us also Vida Kavar, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist with 25 plus years experience in child welfare. She has assisted a multitude of organizations in developing programs that serve children and families, and her expertise lies in permanency and the well-being of LGBTQ plus children. Vida is currently the program director for, among several other programs, the Youth Acceptance Project at Family Builders, for which she provides her clinical expertise, training, and coaching to several jurisdictions throughout the country. Welcome this morning to Vida and to America. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Thank you for this introduction. Hello, everyone. America and I are very happy to be here, as I'm going to use America's term to say that we are so happy that you're willing to share your space with us today. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Here we go. And so today we're going to be talking to you about a project that is very dear to us. It is called the Youth Acceptance Project. And the Youth Acceptance Project will give you more detail in a little bit of a minute. But let's start with a little bit of a little icebreaker. You're all gonna be separated in different rooms for a few minutes, but let's see who knows the answer to this question. Why was the new Pride flag redesigned? A, to look more like a country flag. 2, to represent lesbians. C, to include transgender, Black, Indigenous people of color. And D, I don't know, which is totally okay to say I don't know. So we're gonna be dividing you in groups, and you can answer those questions, and we can answer them when you come back. Angela, I'll let you do your magic.
And it'd be great if folks introduce themselves to each other with your name, your pronouns, and what organization, if any, you're with.
No. Welcome back, everybody, from the breakout groups. We have 2, 1, now everybody will be first back. So everybody should be back now, Vida.
Okay, thank you, Angela. Great, welcome back. I'm pretty sure that you all got the answer, because I could see people answering on the chat box. Thank you for that. So does anyone wants to share something that came up in their group that they want to talk about? Would love to hear some feedback or edits, comments. All right. Well, a lot of you said that the new Pride flag was redesigned to include transgender, Black, and Indigenous people of color, and that's the correct answer. A lot of the time when I present, many folks don't know and are not aware of the colors and why the colors are now, have been added to the flag. So it was kind of a fun question to get us going. So thank you for participating. And like I said earlier, it's totally okay not to know, right? So this is what we're here to learn. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why the Youth Acceptance Project came to be and why it's important that we have such a program. I won't go on long on the statistics, but I will talk a little bit about them. It's just, we know now, with multitude of research that have been done throughout the country, that approximately 30% of youth in the child welfare system identify as LGBTQ+. So that's 1 in 3. So I always say, I have often child welfare workers will say, well, I don't have any LGBTQ kid on my caseload. And I'll say, no, you do. You probably don't know that you do. Another thing that's really important to know is approximately 60% of these youth are youth of color. So we'll really be thinking about the intersectionality of race and SOGI. In juvenile facilities, 1 in 5 people identify as LGBTQ, and 85% of these individuals are people, are youth of color. So again, a huge amount of intersectionality where we really need to be thinking about how we respect the dignity and the stories and the experiences of our LGBTQ youth of colors. And of the 1.6 million homeless in the United States, almost 50% identify as LGBTQ. And of course, they're disproportionately represented in the commercially, sexually exploited population due to very high level of homelessness and being often thrown out on the street by their families or just running away. Another survey that's really important to point out is the Trevor Project did a survey that represented the experience of 40,000 LGBTQ youth across the country. And the statistics and the numbers that they came out with is really grim. And so I present these every time I talk about our LGBTQ youth. They found out that nearly 15% of LGBTQ respondents had attempted suicide in the past year. And of those, more than 1 in 5 transgender and non-binary youth. So we're not talking about life and death, folks, right? We have proof that this is what's happening to our LGBTQ youth. And as we know from the statistics a little bit earlier, our LGBTQ youth of color. 40% of these LGBTQ youth and more than 5% of transgender and non-binary youth reported having seriously considered suicide in the past year. LGBTQ youth who experience housing instability, 28% reported a suicide attempt. Again, we're talking about an attempt, not just self-harm or ideation, but actually an attempt. Nearly 50% of transgender and non-binary youth did not receive the wanted medical care or health care due to the concern of the competence of their providers, so not being competent in treating LGBTQ young people. And also of the participants who participated in the study, many of them said that people tried to change their sexual orientation and gender identity, with 50% saying that it was a parent or a caregiver. So I think, we have to be thinking now, how are those statistics informing us on the work that we need to be doing? From the same study, we also know that children who have a history of foster care are 3 times more likely to have actually attempted suicide. I'm not going to go in all the details. These slides can be made available for you all. But I want you to just realize that when we're talking about attempting suicide, we have nearly 1 in 4 Black LGBTQ youth in foster care reporting a suicide attempt in the past year. And you can see comparison. There's a very high number of Native Indigenous youth as well. And of course, we've got multiracial youth, Latinx youth, and Asian Pacific Islander youth. So I think we need to, again, be thinking about the intersectionality of the youth that we're working with. There is some good news, though. So we know that in contrast, transgender and non-binary youth report having their pronouns respected by almost all people in their life attempted suicide at half the rate. We also know that when the transgender and non-binary youth who have access to shapewear, binder, gender-affirming clothing also reported significant lower attempt of suicide. Teens who report parental support regarding gender identity were 93% less likely to attempt suicide. Huge number, right? And 70% of transgender youth with family support report positive mental health. So this is really what has fuels the need for programs like the Youth Acceptance Project. We also need to remember that historically, LGBTQ youth whose families are not accepting have had less chance of reunification. Many of the shelters who welcome LGBTQ youth are not prepared or trained to learn how to involve the families of these LGBTQ youth. Usually when this is happening, those shelters or group homes really are there to save the youth and really to keep the youth with them and to make a family. However, what happens is when the youth turns 18 or in some states 21, they're then aging out of foster care and they have to be on their own. So really the place where they were was not like a family. It wasn't a parent. Even though those people cared about them, this is not the same as family. We also know that LGBTQ youth of color are disproportionately represented in the system due to systematic racism and LGBTQ plus stigma. LGBTQ youth of color, LGBTQ youth and youth of color do not do well in the system of care due to discrimination and bias, and they languish in congregate care longer than their peers. They also spend more time in group home and short-term residential placement or juvenile justice placement. So the Youth Acceptance Project is one intervention that helps family reunify and better yet, prevent disruption in the first place. And we really need to be thinking about why can't LGBTQ youth have permanency plans that involve their families and their communities, even if traditionally these families and these communities have not been affirming of their sexual orientation and gender identity. We need to be starting to think about how do we do that? How do we involve these families? And we know that families can and do change. So what is the Youth Acceptance Project? I'm going to call it YAP. It's a lot easier to say. It's less of a mouthful. But the YAP is a clinical intervention that was developed by family builders in Oakland. And it's to meet the specific needs of LGBTQ youth and their family when they are at risk, imminent risk, or at risk of entering the system, or if they already have entered the system because of their rejection of their LGBTQ kids. So it's solution focused. It's trans-based, it's trauma-informed, and it's really a family engagement intervention to work with the caregivers who struggle to understand sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, struggling to affirm and accept their children and love them for who they are. So, like I said earlier, the goal is family reunification, and we want to improve permanency outcomes for LGBTQ youth. We also know that parental support, as I said earlier in one of my stats, that parental support is an essential protective factor for LGBTQ youth. So I'm going to discuss a little bit more about what our theory of change, and I will talk about these two last points a little bit later. So our theory of change is that we know we have developed is that early sensitive engagement intervention with families can support change that make a huge difference in the well-being of our LGBTQ youth. And we have designed this research to address the grief, the fear, the guilt, and eventually the hope that parents have when their children let them know that they're LGBTQ+. We have a lot of children now identifying as non-binary and using the pronouns they, them, theirs. And we have a lot of parents who are struggling to understand what that means. And so while we're processing their grief, their fear, their guilt away from their children, we are working with them in understanding who their children are. We do that through 3 phases. We have an engagement phase, an implementation phase, and a transition phase. America, do you want to talk a little bit about the engagement phase?
Yeah, the engagement phase is just meeting families and youth where they're at. So this is not coming in as the expert, it's coming in as being very affirming.
Call you guys,
and we can
back.
We can hear you if you can mute yourself.
Having somebody come out and look at a little building that I have in Mount Airy about seeing if the roof needs
Angela, can you mute?
And what it needs.
Okay, can you hear me all? Okay, yeah, so the engagement phase I was saying is just meeting the families where they're at, is coming into meeting families, being very open-hearted, open mind. I think that's the key of engagement phase, is getting to know your family, being curious, and just getting to know their story and their narrative of where they're at. Is not coming in as the expert. The family's the one that's sharing their story with you, and just really connecting and showing the family that you're being very supportive to them. And just getting to know them. Like I said, I think the most important part of that phase, Vita, that I want to share with everybody is just open heart and open mind, and just meeting families where they're at.
Thank you, America. Absolutely. Thank you. So what do our YAP? We call them social worker. We also call them family advocate, because we really want the family to feel supported. What do? So they work directly with the parents and the caregiver to provide emotional support, emotional understanding, and to improve communication between the youth and the parents. We listen, and just like America just said, we listen, we validate their experience, and we help them process their feelings away from their children. We don't want the children to hear what the parents are experiencing in the discovery of their child's sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. We lean in. We lean into religion, culture, and race. Like America said, we meet the families where they're at. We work throughout California, and there are very different population that we serve throughout the state. We also work outside the state in some different communities, and so it's really important that we listen to the beliefs that the folks' religion may be brought up, and why they may feel a certain way. We also eventually provide accurate information about SOGI. We really debunk a lot of the myth for the families, but also for often the child welfare workers, folks who work with those families. So we dispel the myth and we increase understanding of lesbian, bisexual, transgender, two-spirit, questioning, intersex folks, and young people. We attend LGBTQ community events with parents, if it's to go to a PFLAG event or go to another event where they can feel supported. We'll go with them if they want us to. We also refer parents and families to appropriate resource for medical assessment. We, as licensed or almost licensed providers, we cannot make the decision on whether a child should or should not start hormones or puberty blockers or any other type of medical transitioning. So what we do is we refer to medical providers who have expertise in working with LGBTQ and particularly transgender and non-binary youth. We also go to school. We go to school to support the caregiver, to advocate for the youth, to show a caregiver how they can advocate for their child. We sit into team decision making, and we advocate for permanency planning for LGBTQ youth. We remind everyone that our LGBTQ children, have parents and families around them. So we're really a permanency program. So even if we think that the parent is not yet ready, let's say the disruption has already happened, but the parent is not quite yet ready to welcome their family back in their home, there may be plenty of other people who may, a sister, an aunt, a grandfather, a grandmother. We have had a lot of success working with grandparents and the grandparents welcoming the children in their home, which is also really practical because then we can have the grandparents, because they're a little bit of influence with their own children. And then the other thing we do also is we provide training to counties, group home facility, foster home agencies, to really educate them on the needs of LGBTQ children. America, is there anything you'd like to add here?
I think what's important, Vita, is that all families look different, right? So this process is not linear. It can look very different, and the time frame it varies. So with some families, we can last have a longer period of time, just a listening phase and leaning in, compared to some other families that are more affirming and can attend to the going to school or being an advocate. So it's not a linear process. So I think that's important to mention.
Thank you, absolutely. We just had a family that was referred to us not that long ago through a county DCFS, Department of Children's Services, whose parents were affirming of their child, but they had no idea how to advocate for their child at school, and America helped them do that. But in contrast, we also have some families that come to us and they're in despair. And I know that America can tell a story of, why don't you tell the story, America, of the mom that you met with for a year?
Yeah, so I met with this Latinx identified family. Mom was very religious, Catholic. I had an hour drive to get to this family. I did in-home services. The house was very dark. We used to sit at her kitchen table with the Virgin Mary over us. Was very homophobic, rejecting of her daughter, who identified as a lesbian. I showed up every week. And it was draining every week, having to sit in that dark space and hearing mom just, I was bumping heads with mom, trying to get her to love her daughter for who she authentically was. Until one day I showed up and I said, I don't know, I don't even know where mom's coming from. I want to educate, psychoeducation, and teach her about how to be more affirming. I don't even know where mom's coming from. I sat with her and I listened to her and heard her why it was so hard to get to love her daughter for and accepting her. And after that, windows opened, curtains opened. She received me with open arms. She offered food for me, right? The Latinx culture thing there, and that was a big thing for me. Until I did that, until I listened to mom's narrative and she heard and felt that I cared about where she was coming from. And to that point was where we were able to, a year later, get her to even accept her daughter for who she was and ask about her girlfriend and what she liked, and wanted to know the girlfriend's name. So it went from not wanting to hear about it to even asking questions about who her daughter was.
Thank you, America. And I remember you telling me that for a whole year, this mom was crying every time you were there. So let's talk about what we're seeing. So we've got some good news with the Youth Acceptance Projects. As you will see here in some of those statistics, I mean, our placement stabilization is at 84%. So we have kept children in their families without disruption. So sometimes there's an ER, an emergency referral to the Department of Children's Services, and they will refer the Youth Acceptance Project, the families to the Youth Acceptance Project. And those are the best time that when we were directly within the family, when the child is still at home and has not been, the family has not been disrupted. And so we have good placement stabilization. We have also stabilized in foster home. We work with foster parents as well. And sometimes we work with both foster parents and family of origin. So we've had some good success there. Return to family, again, here we have 64% who had never left their family, but we have plenty also that returned to family once they had already been separated. So even if the emergency referral closes, we continue the case. We continue working with the parents and the family in general. It does not have to be just the parents. It can be anybody that the child identify as a network of support. It is often the extended family members, like I said earlier, the grandparents, the aunts and uncles, or folks who may be in different states that the child wants to have contact with. We have designed several tools that allow us to really measure the level of acceptance of a caregiver, of a parent. This is really what makes our intervention very different than others. This is a great tool that is called the Caregiver Affirmation Abacus that really allows us to measure the level of acceptance of the parents. And while doing that, we were able to show that we have 88% increase in a caregiver affirmation of their children, which is a huge number. We also have 83% increase in use of respectful language towards their children. So respecting their pronouns, using the name that the child wants them to use, being able to talk about sexual orientation, gender identity with their child. So we have quite a bit of success with that as well. Supportive gender expression also increases by 71%, allowing their child to wear what they want, use certain items such as binders or packers, allow their child to, whether it's to paint their nails or wear makeup or wear clothes that makes them feel affirmed and be able to be who they are. And reconciliation of value. So what we mean by that is, a lot of our caregivers, our parents, have beliefs through whether culture or religion that often, makes it really hard for them to understand and accept and affirm their children. So we have after working with those parents, 85% of them have the ability, by reconciliation of value, we mean the ability to hold their religion and also to love their child for who they are at the same time. And I think this is very important because we don't want people to lose their faith community or their network of support. Instead, we want them to both be able to love their children and also retain those beliefs that they were born with, that they were raised with. We also used the CAN, the Child Adolescent Needs and Service Assessment, for a while. And we had 100% of improvement in overall functioning of the youth that we work with. Suicidal gesture, 100% of the youth who had suicidal gesture upon referral were no longer doing so at the end of a youth acceptance project services. 100% of the youth who had been engaged in self-harm were no longer doing so. 97% of youth who had been engaged in a risky sexual behavior showed a decrease in those behavior. And 100% of youth served by continued school. We're very proud of that, because what happens often with our LGBTQ youth is if they're bullied at school, of course they run away, they don't go to school, they don't want to be in their educational environment, their family does not know how to advocate for them. So it's really great to see that with 100% of youth serve continued schools. So really what we're seeing, significant reduction in self-harm and suicide, significant reduction in running away. The youth that America was talking about was always running away until her mother was able to extend a hand to her and was willing to meet the girlfriend outside the house, but still that's okay. That's a huge step. And her daughter stopped AWOLing, which is pretty big. Youth are feeling affirmed and supported by their families. And most importantly, families and caregivers are also feeling supported. We are not putting them away saying that they can't take care of their child, they're bad families. On the contrary, we treat them as expert of their own families. So we keep children and family together, and when possible, and if the child has already been removed, we reunify family, which is really important for us. Just two things for you all to know. We provide this service directly through several counties in the Bay Area in California, like I said, with great success. We also offer services outside California. We have a very intensive 20-hour multi-day training for clinicians and social workers who are interested in doing this work in their own communities. And so we also, with that training comes coaching and technical assistance on a bi-monthly to make sure that not only the youth acceptance program project is being served with fidelity, but also we are here to provide coaching and technical assistance, share with folks. Yeah, we've run through that before. Let's talk about this. Let us tell you how we dealt with it in our own jurisdiction. So we're also right now working in Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and recently New York. So it's a great program. America, what would you like to share?
I think it's just important to just have some level of competency, right? Some of these skills we can't teach you through the gap. I think that's important, right? As long as your heart's in the right place and you're passionate about serving our LGBTQ plus community and families, this is a way to make a difference, right? And just having these basic skill sets of just even how to approach a family, how to affirm someone's pronouns or name, or the way they express themselves. It goes a long way. Like Vita said in the statistics earlier, this is a way to save a life, right? And just the importance of just having those tools in your toolkit to be able to pull out, even if you don't think that you'll ever run across a youth who's LGBTQ plus, that might be the first time, because you had these skill sets, that youth might feel comfortable talking about who they authentically are. And you being able to be the little light at the end of their tunnel. So I just wanted to add those two things, Vita. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a lot of stories we can share with you, but I'd like to stop sharing my screen if I can figure out where my commands are, because they've disappeared, and just open it to some questions, discussions, comments. I'll try to figure it out. Where am I? Sorry, folks, I can't find my commands, so I just have to
try moving your cursor up at the top of your screen, and a stop share might pop up.
I tried that. I didn't see it.
Vita, try pushing your escape key.
Yay, that worked. Thank you.
Okay.
Here we go. Technology works great until it doesn't. All right. So really would like to open the floor to questions, comments. We certainly can share more stories with all of you. I'm going to stay silent for a minute.
So Vita, I have a quick question. What are your thoughts about how this work dovetails or, could potentially address states like Texas who are passing such draconian laws around LGBT youth?
Oh God, you really had to send me that question right at first. There's something that I do in some of my training that's called the do no harm principle. And I ask folks, prior to COVID, I was able to be with folks in rooms, and I would ask the workers or the nurses or whoever I was presenting. I would say, how many of you this morning woke up, by thinking, today is a good day for me to hurt a child. I'm going to do that. I'm going to make sure that I hurt a child. Of course, nobody gets their hand up. Of course not, because none of us have gone into this field to hurt somebody. And so I tell them, when I share with you these statistics earlier, that I'm telling you that 15% of these children, by not having their pronouns respected or their name or not being allowed to be who they are, actually attempt suicide. Do you want to be part of that problem? Do you want to be the 10th or 11th or 50th person in that child's life that did not observe the correct pronoun or the correct name? And so I think when you ask that question that way, people can reflect a little more about being there where the child's at. I also often say, well, this is just a phase. They shouldn't be allowed to experience this. It's not going to be good for their future. But we also know that the protective factor is if you respect and you affirm a child with whatever identity they are presenting to you at the time that they are, even if it changes, that you will give them the self-esteem and the self-confidence that they can use to decide their future and to also be comfortable in who they are. So I don't have a solution to the Texas, except that I would love to go there and have a few talks with some of the folks there. But I can tell you something interesting. I did have someone from the Department of Children's Services from Texas reach out to us at Family Builders about 3 months ago. So they know what's happening, and they don't want to hurt their children. So I don't know that I answered your question, Angela, but I think that programs like ours would be great because we would be able to work with the child welfare folks, juvenile justice folks, and also the parents.
I know America wanted to follow up with that, and then Deborah, I'll come to your question.
Angela, I was going to answer the question about how did I work or talk about and address religion with the mother about the story that I shared. So if it's okay, I could jump in and just answer that real quick.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So, which is a really good question. At the beginning, I did not know what I was doing. To be honest, I learned that the hard way. I just went in, saw the Virgin Mary because of my own biases and stereotypes and culture and my own personal experience. I just said, oh, shoot, I'm gonna have a really hard time with this family because I have a Virgin Mary in my parents' house. I grew up Catholic. I already know the responses that my mom had when I came out, right? So I already went in there feeling like with the wall, right? So my own personal stuff. I made assumptions. I didn't ask much questions. I didn't even want to push that button because I already knew I was going into working with a difficult family or mom, right? Until the point that I was bumping heads. I went in there and I asked, I said, you know what? I never really asked you. I see the Virgin Mary, here. Is that something that you really love, that you're very connected to? And mom's like, yeah. And she even said, she's like, why didn't you ever ask? And I told her, I didn't ask because my parents are Catholic. So I just made the assumption that you having this Virgin Mary meant you went to church every Sunday. So I was just very honest. I said, because that's the way I was raised, right? And she's like, oh, you're Catholic. And I said, I was Catholic, and I was just honest. I was Catholic. I know the understanding and the importance of being Catholic. So I respect that. That's how I told her. I respect that. And I didn't ask because I just assumed it was the same thing. So I apologize for not asking because it wasn't very important for her. And after I said that and I was humbled and vulnerable about where I was coming from, she just said, yeah, I go to church every Sunday and that's my family because I don't have family here. I'm from Mexico and I don't get to talk to them very much. She's like, that's my family. So because that's my family, what are they going to say when they find out my daughter's lesbian? And I said, you're right. I said, that must feel very, very difficult to want to just even the thought of losing the family that you have here when you already kind of lost your family back at home. Right. I mean, that just conversation went on. I can tell you all my conversations I had with her, right? But I think that was a one day that she cried, but it was crying of happiness that somebody was able to hear her story and know, okay, you got me why I can't get to the point of being affirming to my daughter. And you also know that I do love my daughter, right? So that's the common ground. We found a common ground and we were able to work with that. I told you, do you know there's also very affirming Unitarian churches that do have Catholic religion involved in it. And she was like, I didn't know. Right. So that was my end of doing some psychoeducation without really pushing her too far. Yeah, hopefully that answered the question.
Thank you, America. Absolutely. Yeah. The other thing I want to point out, Angela, is the folks in the folks that we're talking that are in child welfare system here in California and perhaps in some of the states. As I said earlier, we're talking about disproportionality of Black and brown children who have been taken away from their families. And there's also a lot of assumption about these families that they will not be able to accept or affirm their children because of their culture or their races or their, and we do not believe that, on the contrary, we work with everybody. We work with the grandmother. We do work with the uncle that we don't think will come along. And they do come along because they do love their children. And I want to point out that right now what's happening in Texas is absolutely horrendous. We're also talking about family. A lot of the families are white families. They're middle-class family. They do have the means to hire, thankfully, attorneys, and I hope they can beat what's happening there. I know that Jill here said that we don't know if we're going to be able to provide a service like the Youth Acceptance Project if the court doesn't allow it, right? So we have to be thinking about these things.
That's so great, Vida. Deborah, thank you so much for waiting so long. I'll pass the baton to you.
Absolutely, no big deal at all. I have two questions. One's quite short, and the other is maybe a little bit longer. So the first question is, what percentage of the youth that you're working with are trans and non-binary, and gender identity is their issue versus LGB? And then the second question is that it's my sense that a lot of families who struggle may also be struggling with other matters, whether it's family trauma or poverty, violence, etc., imprisonment of some family members. And I'm wondering, is generally are the youth involved with the families are involved with other systems, so they're taking care of those pieces, or are you, is the Family Builders Program, the Youth Acceptance Project, also addressing those additional circumstances?
Thank you. Great question. The first question, most of our kids, I can't give you a number. I don't have it, so I don't want to make it up, but most of our children right now are either identify as transgender or non-binary, most of them. We have, actually, I'm thinking right now, I'm trying to think back on the cases we have. We have maybe 3 or 4 that they are gay, lesbian, or bisexual, or pansexual. It's usually more about gender identity and being transgender and non-binary. So that's mostly what we're seeing right now. To your second question, yes, these families also have other lots of trauma, also very negative experience with the systems. Some of them have like 20 providers. We enter into a child and family team meeting, and there's like 20 providers present, and it's very overwhelming for the families, and they have gone through their own trauma. We work around SOGI, around sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. Now, if there is an issue with a family that needs advocacy, or if a family cannot, okay, I have a great story for you. We had a mom who had a child, LGBTQ child, who could not go and advocate for the child at school because she didn't have any teeth, right? So she couldn't afford it. And it was before me, but our ED, Jill Jacobs, always tells the story. And so the advocate lets Family Builder, our ED, know that. And in this specific case, we paid for her to have teeth. And so when she had teeth, we worked with her. She was able to go and talk to school and start advocating for her child. So as we do not take care of all the other problems and traumas that the family has, but we will definitely address things that are barriers to advocating for a child or barriers to understand a child's SOGI. So I hope that answers your question. For example, if transportation is an issue and they are finally, they're willing to go see, go to a gender clinic with their child and transport an issue, of course, we will help with that, because it's around SOGI again.
Thank you. Yesenia Sepulveda had a few questions. Yesenia, do you want to just pop on and ask?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Angela. Hi, everyone. Thank you for hosting this. Yeah, my question was just how I love, how everyone is speaking about supporting and advocating also for parents and guardians, caretakers. I think my question was more around, how does that conversation happen with the young person and helping them to gain understanding and acceptance for, for their parent or their guardian, and, because we have that same conversation with parents and a part of alleviating or beginning that process of healing, right, is in or mending relationship is also, how we come to that understanding. So I'm wondering what that conversation is like with the young people. And also, in having those respective spaces or those conversations with both caretaker and the young person is, how do you all manage the actual unification, in those conversations? So bringing them together to converse about, or bring them, as we say, and bring them in circle, right, and have good conversation around building and healing together, and making, creating a sense of movement in that relationship. And so yeah, so it's just kind of my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. I'm sure America will have a lot to say about it too. I'm gonna chime in first, if that's okay, America. We do juggle with both. So we hold the parents and we hold the child, separately at first, unless they're already ready to be talking. They're already talking about sexual orientation, gender identity in the home, and they just need somebody to come and mediate for them. But usually when we enter the family, or when we come to partner with the family, we work with the caretakers or the parents separately from the child. So we hold both. And so we'd have to work with the child. We affirm the child for who they are. We validate the child's experience. We're often sometimes the first adult who perhaps they have met that is from the LGBTQ community. If we have some providers who are not from the community as well, but we might be the first adult who is actually 100% affirming of that child. So that means a lot to the child. And then we talk to the child. It's like, I'm here. This is what I've done. This is what I've done in the past. I've worked with parents. It's not overnight. It's going to take a while. So I'm going to be working with them and asking them to, do certain things differently. Even if I ask them to use the proper your pronouns maybe once a week, once a week, we'll start with once a week. But I'm going to ask you that you recognize when that happens, and we're going to work together on making you feel more comfortable with who you are. We're going to take you to places where you can be yourself with your peers while we work with your parents. So we hold the child. We really, we embrace their sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. We answer their question, and we work with them having grace and patience. That's really, America, what would you, I'm sure you have a different answer or similar.
Similar, Vita. So yeah, I just think, first of all, Yesenia, thank you so much. And that question and just the word healing, I think that goes a long way. So just thank you. And to answer it, I think of a balance, like you said, Vita, of learning how to balance both and separately, and then joining them, family and youth, when they're ready. So they can be healing towards each other, right? Instead of hurtful. And then I think of transparency. I think the most that I get out of the work with families and youth is if I'm very transparent and I explain to you, this is what I'm doing with your caregiver, with your mom, with your dad, with your grandma, with your stepmom, right? Whatever it is, I am very transparent, so they know what I'm doing and also why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. The explanation, right? We tend to just be in action and not explain, and that goes a long way for youth. I don't think youth are ever really explain what's happening and just are expected to follow along. So, you know, to your question, Yesenia, I think just be very transparent with the youth and letting them know and knowing, hey, I got you. Like, I understand where you're at. I know who you are. I respect you. This is what I'm doing. And also too, I'm also listening to mom, right? For example, and maybe, you know, the youth hearing it from you, where mom's coming from, say, I'm not taking sides, but I just got to let you know where mom's at and where her fears are or where she's feeling guilty. Right. And just giving her some time, just like she's giving you some time to be who you are. Eventually, we're going to get to the point where we both can meet together, or we can have a conversation about the way you're identifying or how you want to dress and express yourself to the world. Like, wouldn't that be cool if you could talk to your mom about that? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay, well, let's just give her some time to process what she's going through, so she's able to do that for you. And then I think just being transparent, like I said, goes a long way.
Absolutely. Thank you, America. Yes. And America, I'm responding to the second part of your question, which was, you know, how do we like reunify, you know, when they're ready, when are they ready to be together in the same room with us and have those conversations? Like, mom, what question do you want to ask your child? You know, like maybe mom will say, well, when did you know? You know, when did you know that? Why didn't you tell me? Or did I do something? You know, and so we can facilitate those conversations when they're all ready. And we transition, we close transition the case when the family has the ability to advocate for themselves, look for resources for themselves, when they have the ability to talk about sexual orientation, gender identity with themselves, you know, within the family. When the parents accept the young person's date mate, or you know, things like that, allows the person to be who they are, advocates for them in community, in the family, et cetera, et cetera. So we have very particular point that we look for before we transition a family.
Thank you. Amanda has been patiently waiting. I'm going to pass the baton to her to ask her question.
Okay, no worries. So to piggyback off of, I have two quick ones. To piggyback off of Deborah, I find in my son is trans. I find that in his community of people, that while sexual orientation and gender identity are very separate things, there is actually a lot of intersectionality. I don't have that number, and I don't know if you do. So that was one. The other one being that as one of the first couple of out trans kids in my son's school district, a lot of parents whose kids started to transition or identify, recognize their identities as being somewhat non-binary or not necessarily the gender they were assigned at birth, they got referred to me. And I did become part of a parent support group, things like that. Do you have referral parents or support groups or things like that that are part of your program?
Thank you, Amanda. Great question. There's nothing better than a parent talking to another parent about their own experience. So yes, we do refer parents to other parents who have similar experience. We also use groups like PFLAGs and resources like this. But you're absolutely correct. There is nothing that compares to a parent. So when we are able to hire, for example, a parent who already, you know, when we have an opening and we can hire a parent as well that can have those conversations with other parents, we do that if they are also in the mental health field. So that's like the best thing. Did we answer your question? You asked me, yes. So there is a lot of intersectionality, you're right. And, you know, which is beautiful nowadays, our young folks are identifying very, very different ways in sexual orientation and in gender identity. So we have, you know, pansexual, demi-romantic, demisexual. So there is all these different sexual orientation as well that we see in our children, yes, who are also non-binary and transgender, absolutely. But we find at the Youth Acceptance Project that the journey of the transgender child and their family is sometimes a little bit different than the journey of a family who has a gay, lesbian, or bisexual child. Obviously, you know, and as the child gets older, maybe there is more work that needs to be done. You know, when we're thinking about if the child wants to have puberty blockers or no puberty blockers, you know, do they need to see a gender specialist? Will the parents be okay with that? You know, will the parents go with them? So it's a little bit of different journey.
Carolyn, do you
Can
want
we
to?
take one? I'm sorry, I was on mute talking. Can we take one more question?
Sure.
Any last burning questions? Okay, I don't see anything in the chat either.
I have already asked a question, but if nobody else has one, I'd ask a third.
Sure, go ahead.
You mentioned that this is manualized, and I'm wondering if you can talk more about what that looks like and
Yes.
how someone might get their hands on a manual.
You can get in touch with me. So the way we facilitate for, like I said, for other communities to provide this service, this type of service in your community, is that you can contact me, and we will come and we will give the training. We have a 20-hour training, and then with the manual that comes with the manual and all the forms, we are licensed program, so all of our forms and everything are licensed to family builders, and then we offer you coaching and technical assistance following that, either monthly or bi-monthly, depending on your need. So we just finished an evaluation with the University of Baltimore through a quality initiative from the Children's Bureau, and so we're hoping to have those results soon. We're the only manualized program that works with families of LGBTQ kids. So that's the nice thing. So yes, get in touch with me, and then we can talk about how to bring those services to your community. Absolutely.
Vita, do you have a second to put your contact information one more time in the chat this time?
Of course.
In case folks didn't get a chance to
Absolutely
jot it down. And then I think if
I did it, Rita.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for typing so fast.
Well, thank you again so very much, America and Vida, for this wonderful presentation, and especially for the wonderful work that you've been doing. Folks, get in contact with YAP. You have Vita's contact information. Thank you to all the participants for being here and for asking such wonderful questions. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
That was
Bye.
amazing.